Welcome everybody to the mountain. We're going to let Bill Lawrence down at the San Diego History Center get us started whenever he's ready. Turn it over to you, Bill.
Thank you, Mike. And hello to all of you up on Palomar Mountain. We say good morning here from the San Diego History Center. I see Dr. Seth Mallios is there. All right. Seth, we're going to throw it to you. The program is all yours now.
Thanks, Bill. I'd like to welcome everybody here today. I'm thrilled you could join us both at the History Center and all the folks that made the trek up to Palomar Mountain as well. We'd like to begin today's program with a land acknowledgement by one of our student archaeologists. I'd like to introduce Brittany Domini. I got it.
Hi, I'm Brittany Domini, and I am an enrolled member of the Northern Arapaho tribe, and I grew up on the Wind River Indian Reservation that is located in Wyoming. So it is my honor and privilege to give this land acknowledgement today. For millennia, the Luiseno and Kumeyaay people have been part of this land. The word Palomar means many things in many languages. In Kumeyaay, it means to win with arrows. And the Kumeyaay have shared this land with the Luiseno people. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced Indigenous people for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Luiseno and Kumeyaay.
Thank you, Brittany. It's now my pleasure to introduce San Diego State University Vice President of Student Affairs and Diversity, Luke Wood. Come on up, Luke. I'd like to emphasize that I knew long before I knew Luke as an administrator, I knew of his scholarship on African-American youth experiences, and I got to serve on committees that reviewed much of what he did, and it is such an honor to have you here today.
All right. Well, it's very good to be here. Thank you, Seth, for the introduction. And good morning, welcome, and thank you for joining us here as we celebrate Juneteenth and honor Nathan Harrison. And I feel honored to be standing on the land of the Kumeyaay and Luiseno, and thank you for the land acknowledgement. As was mentioned, my name is Luke, and I serve as Vice President for Student Affairs and Campus Diversity at San Diego State University, and also our Chief Diversity Officer, a lot of us with "and" titles. We get a lot of work done. For more than a decade, I've been on faculty at San Diego State and have become the first Black distinguished faculty member in San Diego State history. I'm also a critical race theory scholar. My research investigates the experiences of Black students in school from preschool to doctoral level education. And given the historic nature of today and this archaeological dig, which is absolutely amazing, I could not be more honored to be part of such an important event. And again, thank you all for joining us at what happens to be SDSU's first ever Juneteenth community level event. We also want to give a special shout out to Jim Herrick for his role in putting this together and helping to vision this incredible time for us to be able to spend and learning history and also just engaging in community with one another. So thank you. So today we celebrate Juneteenth. Juneteenth is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States. And as many of you know, today has been recognized with an even higher level of recognition through the federal government. Just a few days ago, US President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris signed into a bill into law to make June 19th a federal holiday, commemorating the end of the legal enslavement of Black Americans. And so today marks the first celebration of that day. It's important to remember this day and our own local connection to this holiday. So on June 19th, 1865, Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, to announce that the Civil War had ended and that the slaves had been freed. And you see, Texas was far more remote than many of the other states. And so this was an important message for folks to be able to hear, particularly those who were enslaved at the time. And for those who were enslaved in Texas, the Emancipation Proclamation, which had ended slavery, had little to no effect on their condition. And so the Emancipation Proclamation was a powerful document, but in many ways was still symbolic because the larger population of enslaved Black people were still in bondage. It was a statement without full action, and the promise of action came 2 years later on Juneteenth, which is why we celebrate this very important day. And while many celebrate July 4th, 1776 as a day of political independence, Juneteenth represents the day of moral independence for our nation, the true birth of our nation. For how could we celebrate the freedom when we know that millions were still enslaved in chains? And here is where the local connection comes in. Nathan Harrison was one of the individuals who was freed in Galveston on that day. And today we honor him as the first Black homesteader in San Diego. And for me personally, and for my family, Juneteenth also has a very personal meaning. As an African-American, my own family were enslaved in Texas. And for us, Juneteenth represented a day of emancipation, or what we would call the Day of Jubilee, in reference to the Day of Jubilee in the Bible. While the leadership of the University History Curator, with the leadership of University History Curator and Anthropology professor and all-around great guy, Dr. Seth Mallios, and in collaboration with the San Diego History Center, our students have been able to uncover more than 50,000 artifacts at this site, which is absolutely amazing. And some of them were seen right before me. This project has provided hands-on, engaging learning experiences for students about Black history in California, a history that is oftentimes not told well within our schools, our colleges, and our universities. And this site provides a tangible example of our institution's commitment to diversity and inclusion, innovative research, and fostering a positive student experience. Another reason that Juneteenth is a special day is exactly 1 year ago, the university leadership released our 10-point plan on Juneteenth, acknowledging our commitment to developing and advancing the holistic well-being of Black students, faculty, staff, and community members. This action plan addressed meaningful initiatives and efforts around curriculum, supporting research, information sharing, and continued conversations around institutional and systemic racism. Chief among the actions identified in the plan was the implementation of a Black or African-American cluster hire, which we're in the final stages of right now. This cluster hire focused on hiring faculty members who had a demonstrated record of success in either doing research, teaching, or service focused on Black and African-American populations. And while the campus promised that we would focus on doing hiring for 5 faculty members, we're proud to announce that based upon how things are shaping up right now, again, we're in the final stages of it, it looks like we'll have 13 faculty members who are part of this specialized theme, including 9 in academic affairs and 4 in student affairs. So that's an important accomplishment. In addition, the 10-point plan that we released a year ago today also elevated the KEEP program, founded by Quincy Penn, to establish the Harold K. Brown Knowledge, Education, and Empowerment Program, KEEP, or HB KEEP as we call it. With the generous support of key donors such as Malin Burnham and Bob Payne, this program supports career development, career readiness, financial literacy, and community building for students who identify within the African diaspora. Essentially, it's a career readiness program for students to help them transition from college to career. Because it's one thing to go to college, it's another thing to finish college, but it's an entirely another thing to be able to use that degree to have the career that you want and to create a better life for yourself and for your family. And that's what the KEEP program does. But our commitment to uplifting Black peoples cannot be solely isolated to a single month or a single day. There has to be more. And in addition to these, there's been far more efforts that we've been engaged in the past several years to show the action. And the reason I keep coming back to these examples of action is that in many ways, Juneteenth is the demonstration of that action, because there was a piece of paper somewhere that said that you were free, but you weren't totally free until the army arrived, which is even more interesting hearing the name of what Palomar Mountain represents in the Kumeyaay language. For example, as a community, we have established a new race relations and policing policy in response to what we've seen across the country with the murders of many young people and many people from the Black community. Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, Oscar Grant, Alfred Alongo here in San Diego, and many others. And what we did following the murder of George Floyd is that we brought together leaders from our Department of Africana Studies and our School of Public Affairs to establish a new requirement now so that every student who goes into criminal justice, who's going to major in criminal justice at San Diego State, now has to have coursework on race relations and policing. It's a Black Lives and Policing class that they take as a requirement now for graduation, so that we're doing our part in ensuring that we're preparing law enforcement officers who can positively engage with the Black community. But changing our curriculum, it can't only stop there. We're also hiring embedded social workers right now who are working with our university police department. And essentially what they'll be doing is going out as part of a co-responder model so that they can engage people who may be experiencing trauma, who may be having concerns around mental health or overall well-being, so that as we do so in a way that it does it from not necessarily a full policing standpoint, but a comprehensive social work standpoint, so that we can create a positive relationship between those who are engaging with law enforcement and our law enforcement community. This is a major advancement in our institution's practices around this. And of course, given our location in San Diego and what happened to Alfred Alongo and El Cajon, it makes it even more important for us to be able to focus on doing that. As a community, we've also expanded our Black Resource Center based upon a fee that was expanded by our own students that they supported. Basically, we've been able to provide extensively more resources to our cultural and identity centers. Now, each center before was essentially a spot in a location with very few resources. Now each center, including our Black Resource Center, has a director, an assistant director, a coordinator, an embedded faculty scholar, and embedded counseling and advising, so that we're creating intensive resources to support and create spaces that are safe and supportive for our Black and African American identified students. And out of that same center, we run our Henrietta Goodwin Scholars Program, which is named in honor of Henrietta Goodwin, who was the first African American to graduate from San Diego State University. And there's far more things that we've done. I could go on forever about changes that we've done to curriculum, changes that we've made in terms of course evaluations and how we assess faculty, commitment to creating a welcoming, inclusive environment. We've had changes around admissions in terms of creating pathways for students coming out of a MOJA, which is a retention program in our community colleges. So we're bolstering that transfer pipeline where we see many of our most diverse and excellent students in our community colleges. So as a campus, we are committed to action, just like Juneteenth represents a day of action. And we look forward to continuing to do that as we move forward. And I just want to close by, again, thanking Jim for putting this on. Thank you, Seth, for the incredible find that you had here, for the work that you've done, for the years of dedication to uncovering the life of Nathan Harrison and helping us to engage hands-on in real life with Black history on Juneteenth, on the first day that we get to truly celebrate this as a federal holiday. So in closing, all I want to say is that Black lives matter, Black minds matter, and enjoy Juneteenth. Thank you.
Thanks, Lou. It's giving me goosebumps. That was outstanding. I also wear a lot of hats for the university, but this one's my favorite. It's my digging hat. And I want to start by emphasizing that before I get into the spectacular finds of the last 3 weeks, that I want to introduce the finest field crew that I've worked with in my 30-year career of doing this. You met Brittany Dominy. There's also Samuel Gerstein, Shaylee Gibbs, Katie Isola, Kathleen Crow, Yvette Porter-Moore, Alexis Lexi Rogers, Jake Smith, Adam Steinhauer, our two supervisors, Jamie Bastidi and Shannon Farnsworth. And then we also had some guest archaeologists, Dr. Nicole Mathwick, my kid, Gabby Mallios, and two Watsons, Mike and Michaela Watson. I'd like everyone to give a round of applause. An amazing field crew. I I get a whole lot of credit for digging this site. And as the many archaeologists here can attest to, if it were just me digging this site, we'd have about 5 archaeologists and I would have quit a long time ago. The students have found 99.999% of these artifacts. They've done everything and they've been absolutely amazing, even as they were huddled up on 38-degree nights during week 2 and 95-degree days during week 3. They've been absolutely fantastic. I also want to thank Vicki Morgan, the landowner at Harrison Serenity Ranch, who makes all things possible. I want to thank CSU trustee Jack McGrory and Una Davis. Jim Herrick, I want to thank him as well. And I also want to extend a special thank you to videography genius Mike Watson, who has done wonders for us. And there are a lot of you here today. I want to thank all of you for coming up here. This is the biggest turnout that we've had for an archaeological open house, and it feels like the stars have really aligned with the federal proclamation of the national holiday of Juneteenth. I think this is absolutely spectacular. This site is about freedom. And when you consider what Nathan Harrison endured, when you consider being born into slavery, when you consider the treacherous trek across the country in the 1840s, when you consider the violence of the mining camps in Northern California and Gold Rush Company, when you consider the horrors of the Old West, the Wild West, when you think about all the sundown towns up and down Southern California, this is an individual that if you were to judge people on what they've overcome in their life, I don't think there's anyone more important in San Diego history than Nathan Harrison. That's why this site is so special in terms of personal order, in terms of community that he established, and in terms of the long life that he was able to forge here, becoming a local legend, working his way into the hearts of so many in San Diego. He is San Diego's first permanent African-American. And I want you to think about that concept for a moment. What is permanence? Is it just showing up first? Is it just being buried here? It's this deeper issue of community and history and memory. And that's something that scholars long before me proclaimed him as the first permanent African-American, but it's something that we realize on a daily basis at this site. It is here that Harrison lived free after decades of persecution and abuse and terror. You all made the drive up here. You know that this place is perched above the valley below. And one of the key nuances to living here is that Harrison always had the option of not to engage with people. This is the highest point around. This is the safest spot in the county. And Harrison builds this cabin at the nexus of the road up the mountain and a Native American path that goes by the site. He homesteads this property, obtaining it legal through the US government, but it's also gifted to him by the people of Rincon. This is an individual that forged an alliance, forged bonds with everybody in the area, so much so that when a snake oil salesman named Nathan Hargrave in 1913 managed to sneakily grab the property at auction, all the locals rallied around Harrison and got the property given back to him. This story is about community. It's about perseverance, and it's a most spectacular story. There are times when people say, you know, it's a great African-American story. And I always correct them because it is the quintessential American story of overcoming obstacles. Over the last 17 years at this site, we found 50,000 artifacts. And I'll be honest with you, I thought we had found it all. And the students during this field school found things that shed new insight into Harrison's life that absolutely blew me away. In the past, we'll do a little tour in a little bit. And in the past, we had worked in the cabin itself, and then we had worked in the patio. And now we're in the heart of the trash dump. And as any archaeologist will tell you, that's heaven. That's the trash. That's the best stuff. And so you'll be able to see on the table here today, you'll be able to see butchered cow bone. You'll be able to see sardine cans, a sardine key with the lid wrapped around it. You'll see alcohol bottles. You'll see a relish bottle. We now have a ketchup bottle, a mustard bottle, and a relish bottle. Tim Gross asked me if we had found baseball cleats. This is the American story here. We get to see little slivers of so much of his daily life. We get to see the rowel, which is the little star that's on the spur. And these are the most kind-hearted, delicate spurs. These are plain Janes. These are very, very kind to the animal. We see little reflections of his life raising horses here. We see fancy English porcelain. We actually found a piece that fits into our picture here that we found 17 years earlier. We find tobacco cans. We find canning jars. We find hundreds of fired rifle cartridges, which is most noteworthy for the fact that for individuals who were allies of the Native American population during this time, it was illegal for them to have firearms. Fascinating to note that this was an individual who was well armed, but kept it hidden. The rifle doesn't show up in the photographs, and we only have the evidence in the earth. And this is that great tension between history and archaeology, where we have all these stories. Nate Harrison's a local legend, but many of these stories take the narrative in a different direction. And we have a new narrative based on these little facts in the ground. There are two things I want to point out on this table that if you could take extra close attention to. One is we call this the Blob. It's a big hunk of dirt that has about 40 artifacts in it. This site is so difficult to dig. Many of us here have dug at sites all over the country, and you know when you're at an easy site. And I'll tell you why. It's flat. The dirt is soft. There aren't bugs. All the things we seem to specialize in here. This is rock hard dirt, and they pedestaled this and were able to pull out a giant dirt clod that has a meat can and a tobacco can and a sardine can and all sorts of other goodies. Just a testament to how far they've come archaeologically. But the real rock star was an artifact that came out the first week that made my jaw drop. This is Nathan Harrison's wedding ring. Can't believe I'm getting choked up. That's archaeologists cry over old garbage. There are stories. Let me start with the memorial. Nate Harrison passes away, and in 1923 they have a memorial for him up on the mountain. And much like me, the patriarch of the family, Bailey, gets choked up and can't give the eulogy. And so someone else steps in, and he starts talking about Harrison, and he proclaims that no woman could win Nate Harrison's heart, that he was never married. And there was a crowd there like this, and suddenly the murmur starts going through the crowd. Wait, he was married? Yeah, he totally was married. No, he was married once. He was married twice. And so there's this big debate about, was Nathan Harrison married? Now, all the marriage certificates, all the records burned with Paula many, many decades ago. I never thought we would be able to contribute to this story. I thought that was one of those that would just be a lost mystery. And to find a wedding ring, and this is a 19th century wedding band. It's gold plated. It's around an iron center, so it's a cheaper ring. It suspiciously fits one of my fingers really nicely. To find something seemingly so personal in the ground after I wrote the book, after I thought we had found it all, just completely left me speechless. And the great thing about archaeology is you solve one mystery and it opens up many more. Why was it there? And this is where your guess is as good as mine. Was someone just taking out the trash? Was Nathan just taking out the trash and the ring slipped off his finger? Or was this after a divorce where he decided he was done with it? You can make up as good of a story as I can, but this is the fun of archaeology. Is on the one hand, we come face to face with these facts of the past that tell new stories about hidden identity, that show you about self-sufficiency. And then at the same time, it just makes your imagination pop with endless possibilities in a single artifact, a single item. So I encourage you all to check out, this is everyday life here, from the most spectacular ring to the little eyelets on your shoes, to a little piece of shoe leather. All of that is in here, and we've pulled the stuff. All of this came from this year, and all this was found by the students. I found 0 of these artifacts. And I want you to take a close look at all of this. At this point, we are going to transition. We're going to switch cameras, switch microphones, and we're going to start taking questions from the History Center at the site. For the many people here today, I encourage you to check out the artifacts, ask the students questions as well. And if you want to try your hand at digging, find a student and work with them as well. This is public history. This is something we celebrate here. And I'm so honored you could be here to join us on this very special day. Thanks so much.
History Center, we'll be back with you in 2 minutes. We'll do a tour and Q&A, and we'll be back with you in 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mike. We'll see you in 2 minutes. Hello, Mike and Seth.
All right, everybody. Mr. Mallios is a very popular man.
We're good.
All right, you're talking.
All right. Welcome, History Center. I'm going to walk you through the site here. So
Okay.
this is, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Hi, Seth. It's good to have you back.
Thanks, Bill.
You're going to walk us through the site, correct?
Yeah. So
Let's
we
see.
are approaching the Harrison cabin from the east side, and this is where the chimney would have been. And as I walk magically through the walls, I'm now standing in the center of the 11-foot square that is the Harrison cabin. So imagine for a second, when we started this dig, all of this is covered by about 3 feet of dirt and waist-high weeds. We didn't know the site was here. It's easy to look at this site now and feel really clever, like, oh, we knew it was here all along, and every hole we put in the ground found artifacts. That wasn't the case. We started and we slowly uncovered all of this, and this is where we learned that this small structure was the Harrison cabin. You can even see the cutout of the original doorway of the Harrison cabin. The floor is sunken. It's about a foot lower. That keeps it cooler in the summer and warmer during the winter. It's actually part of an indigenous tradition. This structure, as all of you know, in the History Center, is recreated in the History Center exhibit. And it was such a joy to finally see the complete cabin, because this is the only cabin that I ever knew. Didn't find too many artifacts in the cabin, but what we found was fairly special. Found his watch, found a silver quarter from 1899, found some sentimental items as well. A projectile point was buried in the corner with ritual significance, and even found the key right by the front door. So now I'm walking through this threshold, and the main activity area of the site was right here, the patio. It was a patio that was about 10 feet wide and about 15 feet long. And in this area, we saw a lot of activity of cooking, of baking, and of processing sheep. Remember that Harrison's primary occupation was as a shepherd. We found sheep shears. We found all sorts of sheep remains. The interesting thing about the sheep bones is almost all of them were butchered after they were 6 years old, which is after the point where the wool is at its full fruition. So the students are screening dirt here. We're backfilling this area. We've dug through all of this. This is where the patio is. And now the area we're chasing is the midden, a fancy word for trash pit. And so as we walk down the slope, this is where we enter the main area of today's site. And that is these units. And all of this is a midden that is broadcast refuse. And what that means is that Harrison sat on the patio, and when he was done eating, done drinking, he would just chuck it down the hill. And if you look closely, you can see people working in these units, finding everything from glass bottles and cans and bones. Jamie in particular in the back unit has much of a bottle in place there. You can see the tools that we use. Sometimes we use the little trowels for delicate things, and sometimes we have to go aggressively with these little picks. We call them whistle pigs, to actually move this rock hard dirt. One of the big questions is, when do you know when you're done? And that's always the hardest one to answer. What we're seeing in those units down in the corner by Natalia is a sandy layer with fewer artifacts. And so we may be hitting the edge of the site here beyond these rocks. This may have been part of a wall that bounded the activity area to the west. So we may be close to wrapping up the site in terms of what we're finding. But then again, I seem to say that every year. I'm now ready to turn it all over for you, and you can have a question for me or a question for any of the students. They're the ones doing the hard work, so they'll be happy to answer your questions as well.
Great, Seth. So we do have a question from the audience here. Is there any item you expected to find that you have not yet uncovered?
It's a great question. You know, you do have hopes when you go to a site, and some of that is based on what's in the photographs. And I'll tell you, he always had a walking stick with him, sort of a fancy cane. And that is something that when we were looking at the photos, I really wanted to find that, because that was each of these photographs, even though you can look at them all in the History Center, many of them are similar. They have these distinctive artifacts in them. And, we found his boot, and we found his watch, and we found 18 of his pipes, but we never found his walking stick. But that is a great question. I've never been asked that question before at the site.
We've got really smart people here at the History Center. Talk a little bit about the artifacts and what is going to be happening with them after you conclude the dig.
So one of the things about the legacy of archaeology is that people love to dig and dig and dig, but archaeologists haven't always been great at cleaning the artifacts, gluing them back together, researching the artifacts, and writing reports. And for every 1 month we spend digging, it takes a good 9, 10, 11 months to do the full research on it and to put out the reports. We take great pride in the fact that we've done a technical report every season we've dug out here. And that involves a ton of work. But very specifically, what happens after we wrap up today is we take all the artifacts back to the lab. And the first thing that the students do is they wash them. And then after they dry out, then we label them with the provenience from where they came. And then we start gluing them back together. And then we do the research on them. And the rule of the site is if you found the artifact, you get to do the research on the artifact. And that's where it gets really fun. For that Heinz bottle, the code on the bottom tells us that it was relish. There's another Hills bottle that we found that's one of those snake oils from the late 19th century. And so the students will research that as well. And of course, the wedding ring is going to be a lot of fun to do research on. And so there's the report writing of it, but then there's the final stage for the artifacts as well. Right now, we're curating them in the lab, but we don't have it figured out the final destination for the artifacts. The artifacts belong to the land, and they belong to the landowner, but she's been gracious to let us use them for the exhibit. So the long-term plans will either be at the lab or more exhibits.
So the plan right now is it's not the end of the Indiana Jones movie that goes into the story.
That's one of the great points about this being the generation of public archaeology. And that's why this event is so wonderful to have people at both locations, because it's about making sure everybody sees the materials that wants to see the materials. For generations, archaeologists, they did find excavations, but then no one got to see the items. And that's where, that wedding ring that we found, as soon as we get it all cleaned up and researched, it's going to go right into the exhibit there in the cabin in the History Center.
Seth, the majority of the students that you have, where are they in their educational career? Are they undergrads? Are they graduate students?
One of the things I love is it's all the above. We get to see, we have some students that are at the start of their undergraduate career. Some are at the end of their undergraduate career. Some have just started grad school. Some are at the end of grad school. And they're from multiple universities as well. It's not just San Diego State. This is a special project, and it has pull beyond San Diego State, just because of the importance of the topic and the themes that we're researching. And so it's very helpful to me to have students at different levels, because they do a great job of training the next generation. And that helps not only me see the next generation of professional archaeologists, but it helps us on a daily basis in terms of understanding how the site process works.
Could you ask one of the students what life on the mountain has been like for them during this period of time that they've been up?
I'd be happy to. Hey, Sam. Yeah. The question is, what has life been like on the mountain during the archaeological dig?
The food is great, number one. The bugs, could take them or leave them. But overall, I've really enjoyed this experience living on the mountain, and I hope to continue my career in archaeology.
Thanks, is this Sam's first time up on the mountain?
This is your first time on the mountain?
This is my first time doing actual archaeology, not in a classroom, and a real hands-on experience here, and I really love it. Can't say more.
What's the coolest thing you found?
The coolest thing I found was a piece of porcelain that was stained blue. It looked awesome, and I was told that it's part of a bigger piece or a bigger plate, I should say, that was used for butter back in the day.
It's our only vessel of English porcelain. It's pretty spectacular. One thing I'd like to build on Sam's comments. Remember, we're coming out of the pandemic, and we just endured a very tough year of online learning, of canceled classes. To be able to be out here digging was so liberating. Every day, to actually be doing transformative educational learning instead of trying to make the best of the Zoom experience, it really felt like we were on the threshold of returning back into in a very exciting world.
Seth, we hope that the folks that are on the mountain will come here to the History Center to see the exhibit. Can you talk a little bit about the exhibit and for you, the process that we went through, and maybe even talk a little bit about how things have changed?
So it's funny, in essence, those of us, and it was a huge team that put together the History Center exhibit. In essence, we designed two entirely different exhibits. The first was pre-pandemic, and our goal was to make everything hands-on. And then very quickly, we learned that we were living in a hands-off world, in a world that was socially distanced, and that we had to completely transform it. And that's where the fluidity of the staff at the History Center, the versatility to come up with a new design where there was still the same amount of information, but that you could have a little distance, to have our grid recreated in the back of the cabin. What you see on the floor, these are our squares. These are our 5-foot squares. It was a long process. It was difficult. There were many times where I thought, will museums ever open again? And then everything just lined up. I didn't even know that I'd get the clearance to have the field school, but having the field school, doing the virtual opening for the History Center exhibit, and now having San Diego open again, and to be able to have this joint event is such a thrill. And it's something that to have the website, to have the History Center exhibit, and to have an open house at the mountain all tied together, it really makes you feel like you can give access to anybody that wants it. And that's really special. Archaeology doesn't always do a great job at getting those stories out, but I think we've been able to do it.
Hey, Seth, can you talk to Jamie just for a moment? I'd be curious as to what she thinks about being back on the site and her experience in helping with the exhibit.
Hey, Jamie, there's a question for you.
Okay.
What's it like to be back up on the site, back in the project?
Oh, it's so amazing. It was so sad that we weren't able to be up here last year, but it was great to be back up here and to be able to have this great group of students with us. I'm sad it's the last day. I could stay a couple more weeks.
And look at her feet. Look at what she's coming down on. That's one of the reasons she's so happy. This is pretty good for an archaeologist. Can you talk about what's in your
Sure. So, okay. So this is a glass bottle that we've pedestaled, which means we've elevated it out of the ground so that we can see all the pieces and how it's associated with each other. You can see this is a sidewall in the base here, and these are all, we're assuming that it's going to be a one piece, one bottle, but we'll find out when we get back to the lab and are able to clean it better.
Thanks, Jamie.
So Seth, is today the last day of the dig, or will it start up again in the spring?
We'll start up in the spring. We're going to dig on Saturdays in the spring. It's a little different when we dig on Saturdays, partly because the conditions are far more mild. And when the students don't sleep here at the site, it has a different feel to it. There's an intensity to a summer field school that is unrivaled in archaeology. But at the same time, we're going to continue through these units. If you look closely at Jamie's unit, you can see we're only down about 6 inches. There's going to be a whole lot more in that unit. Where I'm standing is down over a foot. This is a unit that's done. We're not going to find any more. But where Jamie is, we still have a couple of goodie layers left to go. So there's still more to be found there, and we'll be out here every Saturday in the spring.
Seth, hold on just a second. I want to ask if there's anyone here that has another question. Okay. So Seth, Nikki would like to know, would like you to retell the story of finding the wedding.
Yeah, let me take you to where it is. I'm so glad to get a question from Nikki Clay. That makes me very happy. So it was in this unit right here. And one of the crazy things about this unit is we had already dug this down about 2/3 of the way down, and we didn't find that much in this unit. Furthermore, we weren't going to go any further south because that's a pear tree that dates back to Harrison's time. This is the most resilient pear tree on the planet. It's an eighth of its original size because it was burned in the Pumacha fire, but you can still see it's still putting out fruit and growth. So we're in this unit, weren't finding that much. Reopened it, had to remove 2 years of weeds and acorns. I didn't think there was going to be much here. And that's when Jamie Bastidi started finding a bunch of old cans and cow bones. And that's what's so wild about the context of this is it was in and amongst the garbage, butchered cow bones and old meat cans. And then it was in the northern corner of the unit. The ring was standing on its side. And so we thought it was buried in the dirt, but standing on its side. So we could only see the top sliver of it. And so we thought it was glass. And we didn't even take that many. We take a lot of pictures out here. And the picture was all about the cans. That's what I was focused on, was the cans and not the ring, because I thought it was just a little short of glass. And then she slowly excavated it and found it. And Nikki, don't tell anybody this, but I did let Lou with some expletives when the ring came out because I was so blown away. It's one of a kind at the site. We found one ring, and out of 50,000 artifacts, almost all the others group into a lot of categories, but there's only one ring at the site.
Seth, is that the most surprising thing that you think you found?
Absolutely. And especially so in that it came in the 9th year of excavation at the site, our 9th season. We've been digging since 2004, but there was a break in the middle. But for it to come out so late in the dig and to be tied to such a huge debate in Harrison's life about whether or not he was married really was spectacular.
Seth, we really want to thank you for not only your collaboration here at the History Center, but what you're doing continually for our community through your involvement at San Diego State. You have revealed so many wonderful things over your career. And I know Mike Watson is probably, his arms are about ready to fall off. So I think at this point, we're going to let you go for a few minutes. We'll come back at 11:30 and do one more hit with the visitors to the History Center. But I really would like to thank our partners at San Diego State University, everyone who has shown up here. We've got lots of food down here, and we're hoping that everyone will continue to eat it. But thank you very, very much for sharing this with us.
Thanks, Bill. And thanks to everyone who attended the History Center event. I'm so pleased that we were able to have that today on this most important day.
Hello, Mike. Are you and Seth up there? Yeah.
Hey, Bill, how's it going?
Great, Seth. It's good to see you, and we're hearing you, I think, now. We have some folks here at the History Center. We're really glad to have you up there on the mountain. And so if you wouldn't mind, give us a tour.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for coming to the History Center, especially on this special first Juneteenth, first official federal Juneteenth. We are here at the Nathan Harrison site. Nathan Harrison was the first African-American homesteader in San Diego County, also the first permanent African-American in San Diego County. And we're entering his cabin through a most bizarre way. We're walking through the chimney here. So back in 2004, this was all covered with dirt, covered with waist-high weeds. There was an angry rattlesnake that was living here that was not happy that archaeologists were moving in. But slowly but surely, we uncovered all this. And so now I'm standing in the center of this 11-foot square that was the one-room cabin that belonged to Nathan Harrison. One of the reasons I love the San Diego History Center exhibit so much is it was the first time I got to see the cabin in three-dimensional form. So imagine this grows into its full form, and that's what you get to see. That's what you get to experience at the History Center. Everything from the rocks themselves to the cut of the doorway. And you see, if you look really closely here, you can see the original edge of the door sill, and it was a sunken floor, which is part of a Native American tradition that keeps the area cooler during the summer and warmer in the winter. So now we'll exit out of the cabin. And this was the primary activity area, not the cabin. The cabin was really just for sleeping. That's what the artifacts told us. Most of the action was here on the patio. It's where Harrison cooked. It's where he butchered the sheep, cow, pig, and deer. All sorts of activities were in this area. This was the primary activity area. And when we started digging during that first decade, it was primarily focused on cabin and then patio. And what we do is we follow the artifact scatter. If you dig a unit and there's not a lot in it, we don't continue in that direction. But if we dig a unit and there's a lot in it, then we keep following it. So all this has been backfilled, but we had dug all of this and it kept pointing this way. It kept on saying there are more and more artifacts this way. And that's where the students are digging now. That's the trash pit. And so imagine Harrison here living his life, someone born into slavery, overcame insurmountable obstacles in terms of the trek cross country, the gold rush, the Wild West, comes down to San Diego, homesteads this property, hanging out on his patio, eating some, drinking some. And when he's done with it, he just tosses it into the trash pit. And that is the archaeological sweet spot. That is where we find all the goods. Everything from food remains to clothing remains to jewelry. And we talked a lot about the wedding ring that we found. Pretty amazing finds here. And the dig keeps going. The students now are working in units at the far west edge of the site, and they keep finding stuff. As we get closer and closer to the site, you'll see Jamie Bastidi here is taking out a bunch of glass pieces of a bottle. Adam and Katie have been finding a whole bunch of meat cans and sardine cans today. This area of the site is still producing quite a lot of artifacts. And I want to emphasize, everybody gives me credit for finding. So, look at, I'm interrupting myself. Look at that mark on the bottle. Holy cow. This is why I start shoving people. What in the world is on the bottom of that bottle? It's not roller. So you want to know a secret archaeological trick here? A little saliva on your thumb, and that makes the lettering pop out. What in the world is that?
It looks like an animal.
I agree. I think that's a cow.
Milk?
Is it a milk bottle? All right. So clearly I just went off the rails here. I was given some sort of formal speech and I got really excited about this bottle. So this is the cool thing about archaeology is we have no idea what's coming next. And this was a big surprise seeing this. We'll be able to date this bottle in terms of putting it back together and finding how far the seam goes up. We'll be able to find the company on the basis of that mark. And we'll be able to tie it to the, there's more. Sorry. I'm getting heckled by the videographer here.
Good. It's good TV.
England. That's a gin bottle. That's London Dry Gin. That's a gin bottle. All right, so I'm going to refocus here. We are wrapping up for today. This is the last day of our 3-week field school. We'll be out here next spring on Saturdays, digging these units, digging that one, taking these remaining ones down. The area where I'm standing right now, this is as low as we go. This is where we hit subsoil and we stop. The area in these other units is much higher up, and we just dig down a few inches at a time. That's our A layer, our B layer, and so forth. We dig in these 5-foot squares that are there in the History Center. You can see our grid and you can see the artifacts that have come out. And this is the trajectory where we're heading. We're heading due west from the cabin. At this point, I'd like to open it up to you all if you have any questions for the students who are doing all the real digging, or for myself as well.
So Seth, we had a question from the first group that came after we had signed off. So I'm going to start with that. Excuse me. Talk about the significance of the projectile point you found in the cabin.
Yeah, I can't emphasize enough the importance of the connection between Nathan Harrison and the Luiseno community here. First, I'd like to emphasize that we tend to make a big deal that he homesteaded this property, filing a petition through the U.S. government, but more important was that this property was gifted to him by the Luiseno. And that starts to show you the initial ties. In addition, through the years, Harrison had 2 different indigenous wives. And what we see in the site is certain items that seem to show this very important relationship. There was a projectile point that was in the corner of the cabin. And earlier today, we had a prehistoric archaeologist, Richard Curator, who specializes in the archaeology of the area. And he emphasized that this showed, oh, there's Richard, the symbolic and importance of things being buried in the corner of the structure itself. And so we don't see very many Native American artifacts, but that in no way undermines the closeness of the relationship. This is something that was integral to who Harrison was and why he was able to succeed in this area.
Seth, talk a little bit about what life is like for an archaeologist up in that space. You've been up there for 3 weeks now. Have you had a shower?
I have had a shower, but I've been wearing the same pants for 3 weeks. They stand up on their own at this point. We get up awfully early because that's the best time to dig, and it's the best light for photography. And honestly, we just dig and dig and dig. And the food has been fantastic. We have wonderful cooks up here. And that keeps us going. On digs where you don't have a great chef, boy, does morale drop quickly. One of the interesting things about the 3 weeks up here is we've had such variety in the weather. The first week was mild. The second week was one of the coldest I've ever felt. Even though it was June, it dropped into the 30s. And then this week has been incredibly hot and buggy. So we got the full range of that. We do have showers up here. So there's certain things that are great. The food is great. The work is great. At the same time, there is no amount of bug spray that'll keep these bugs off of you. I think each one of us has swallowed at least a dozen at certain points. But the great thing is this is real archaeology. All these students have taken a lot of classes on archaeology, but that doesn't mean that archaeology is right for you. I think you have to try doing actual archaeology in the field to know if it really is your calling.
Could you ask one of your students if they've if this is their calling now, based upon their experience?
Hey, Katie, you were the closest. No pressure. Is archaeology now your calling?
I'd like to think so. I like to think I'm good enough that it's my calling. I certainly enjoy it a lot. And I hope that's the path that I get into is archaeology, but who knows, you know?
Can you talk a little about your hat and a potential project for that?
Oh, my hat. My hat says "Save the Bees," and it is, there are rumor, right? And some narrative that Harrison was a beekeeper. And so I'm hoping to get some research on that and yeah, see where that takes me. Maybe it'll be in the archaeological record, maybe not, but it's something that we're gonna dig into. Yeah.
Thanks, Katie. And this is exciting. Sometimes you start with the artifact, but sometimes you start with the historical record that says Harrison kept bees, and then we start calling up the experts and saying, all right, well, what would it look like in the ground? What would we find in the ground? And I'd like to tell you that we've identified every artifact and we've identified it correctly, but there are a ton of unidentified things in our assemblage of 50,000, and some of those may relate to this industry. So that gets pretty exciting.
Seth, can you talk a little bit about what life would have been like there during Nate Harrison's time? And specifically, for example, it gets really cold up at Palomar, as you mentioned. How did he stay warm?
Yeah, you know, I feel like there are 3 lives for Nathan Harrison. I feel like there's the one before coming to San Diego that we know very little of. And then there's San Diego from about 1870 to 1900. And then there's San Diego from 1900 to 1920. And the reason I divide it that way is that's when the road gets widened by the county, and that's when it becomes this tourist attraction. And so in that middle period, that 1870 to 1900, he's a rancher. He's engaging with multiple communities here. He makes shingles for houses. He's a great cook. And most importantly, he's very mobile. He's all over the place. He shows up on the 1880 census 50 miles apart on 2 different censuses. And that's where, you know, you think about different groups being seasonal and migratory. He is definitely part of that pattern. But when we get to 1900, there are a couple of things going on. One is suddenly much of San Diego starts coming to visit him here. And also we need to take into account his age. He's 70 at that point. He, like many of us, is slowing down a little. And that's where people are coming to him and bringing him stuff, and he's giving them water, and they're engaging with one another. And so I look at that middle period as being far more rustic, far more Wild West. And that's where Harrison used to tell stories of running into grizzly bear, running into mountain lion, running into rattlesnakes on a daily basis. I think in those last 2 decades, he's more sedentary, and the world is becoming much more modern. I mean, just think about the fact suddenly automobiles are driving up the mountain, and we found rubber tires from 1912 here. Suddenly he's a repair shop for cars coming up the mountain. So I think there are 2 different fields, but regardless of the different time periods, this is harsh territory. It gets very cold in the winter, very hot in the summer. We're off the grid. It is a tough place to live.
Can you talk a little bit about what the San Diego would have been like during Nate Harrison's time? We had visitors coming, but we also had an influx from with the California expansion, kind of the golden age.
Yeah. And that's where, putting this in the context of California history, and especially the railroad coming to San Diego in the 1880s, you have a population boom, and then you have some of the first tourism for San Diego. It wasn't the beaches, it wasn't Coronado, it was actually up here. And that's where folks would take that 3-day ride, San Diego to Escondido, Escondido to Tin Can Flats up here. And that sort of trip, you almost went back in time. They were seeing Nathan Harrison, who looked just like a former enslaved individual. And it was like you were going back to a time period before the Civil War. And that is how he became what is likely San Diego's most photographed 19th century San Diegan, more than Alonzo Horton, more than Wyatt Earp. And it was because people came up here to visit him, and they were intending to photograph him all along. Remember, people didn't have cameras on their phones. They didn't have phones. They were bringing up those Brownie cameras for this photo opportunity. One of my favorite artifacts is one of the camera lenses from one of those Brownie cameras from the early 1900s. And this is where he had his choice to engage with people or not. And for many cases, at least 41 in terms of the 41 photographs, he chose to engage with people and tell them the stories of Palomar's past.
What has been the most surprising thing that your students and you have found on the mountain?
Bill, that one was a little choppy. Would you mind repeating it?
Sure. I think Mike was go ahead.
Okay, so favorite artifact, this year changed everything when we found that wedding ring. In the past, I would have answered one of those bottles of snake oil, because they tell this great story about lawlessness, and you never knew what you were getting, and people all trying to swindle each other. I thought that was so perfectly emblematic, not only of the Wild West, but how even your friends could be enemies as you're trying to navigate this time period. But when we found that wedding ring, that one really got to me, primarily because this was a story I never thought we'd be able to answer. At Harrison's memorial in 1923 on the mountain, the person giving the eulogy said that Harrison had never been married. And suddenly the whispers meandered through the crowd that he had been married. And there was this big debate. And since the marriage records were burned at Paula many decades ago, I never thought we'd be able to address that big debate. But finding that wedding band in and amongst Harrison's garbage, that really took my breath away, to be able to have such a concrete answer to the story, but at the same time raising more questions. What was it doing there with a meat can and a butchered cow metapodial? That was another big question that'll continue to plague us. But I'll tell you, where the students are sitting now, there could be new great artifacts. We found that ring in the 9th season of excavation. Who knows what we'll find in the 10th?
So you are saying that there's going to be a 10th?
Yeah, we're excited for the spring.
That's great. Seth, hold on just a quick second. I want to ask the audience here if there's any questions that I can reply. Yes, sir. Okay. Hold on. So, Seth, the first question is, you know that Nate Harrison has been married at least twice. Are there any descendants?
So there are two answers to this question. His first Indigenous wife had at least 2 children from a previous union, and he was very close to them. And we've been able to track the family tree to a certain degree. It was Dory Mary Smith was his step granddaughter, and she had 6 children. And so we've been following that lineage. Those weren't biological children, but they were definitely his family. What's interesting, though, is Harrison temporarily loses this property in 1913. A friend had been paying his property taxes. That friend passed away. The taxes weren't paid. The county auctioned off the property, and a local swindler picked up the property. Harrison's friends rallied to his side and were able to reacquire the property for him. And when Harrison told this story, he said, "I always wanted my daughter to inherit this property. She's a nurse in New York." And that really blew our minds when we found that story, because that may be part of his life back when he was living in Kentucky. That may be part of the pre-emancipation story of Harrison. It could be from Kentucky, or it could have been on his trek across the country in Missouri. And so those questions are still out there. And that's where, it's easy to think that archaeology has come up with a lot of answers. We have, but there are still so many unanswered questions about this site, this story, and this time.
Okay, hold on. We're getting the next question. Jeannie? No, there was a fireplace in the cabin. There was a fireplace. Okay.
Did you pop a line?
Yes.
Yes, there was a fireplace in the cabin. So we walked through the chimney, and we know that for 2 reasons. One, that square footprint of the cabin, there's a tiny rectangle where the chimney was. But even better evidence is we actually found a lens of soil, a perfectly horizontal lens of soil that was all charcoal and ash. We did soil chemistry tests on that to verify that. That's one of the few living surfaces around here. This area, if you look closely, there's so many rodent holes through here. It's been stirred up quite a lot. There aren't too many original living surfaces, but that was one of the best ones there in the cabin. And that fireplace, that would heat up that cabin nicely. Those rocks are pretty good insulation. It would have a cedar shingle roof, and they would also use it's called clay chinking, where you shove dirt and clay into those gaps in the wall, and it seals it up pretty nicely. So he'd be able to stay warm.
Seth, he also he raised sheep, correct?
Yeah. So his son-in-law was named Fred Sheep Smith. He was one of the biggest sheep barons in all of Southern California. And we found a whole bunch of sheep shears. And by far the number one kind of animal bone at the site we found is sheep. And where it gets fascinating is that almost all the sheep were butchered after the age of 6. We can tell that by when the molars erupt in the sheep jaw and when some of the bones fuse. And after 6 is when the wool diminishes. So he was only eating the sheep after they were no longer a profitable wool source. And in some of those old photographs, if you look closely, you'll see some sheepskins being stretched on tables.
Interesting. So Seth, there's going to be a period of time where after today, you're going to close the dig, and then it'll start up again in the spring. What happens to the site during that time?
We pretty much leave it as is. It's important to note how much wildlife is in this area. And I've been on other sites where you cover it with boards and tarps. The problem is those often trap and injure animals totally inadvertently. What we're trying to do is return this place to nature. That's why we backfilled that area of the site. And so we'll leave this open. You know, it's private property and there's a locked gate. So I don't worry too much about things being impacted. But it's really about, you know, the natural scenery. We don't want this to be too scarred by all the holes in the ground. And that's why we love the cabin the way it is here on the mountain, just being the footprint. And you can see that our excavation area isn't that big. We're really only looking at about a 20-foot by 25-foot area. So we found ways to help stabilize it. The truth is that this area gets so much rain during the winter that no amount of tarps or boards would keep that water off of it. And also, you know, it's worth emphasizing there are a bunch of animals that this is home for them. All those rodents and all the rattlesnakes that chase them is their home too.
Okay, hold on. I think we have one more question. Yeah. Oh, okay. That's a really an interesting question. So Seth, the member of our audience is noticing your passion for your work and for this project, that of your students as well. Do you all have a favorite archaeology joke that you tell?
A favorite what?
Archaeology.
A favorite archaeology joke. That's a great question.
Or maybe or if I could ask, maybe it's the joke about Seth.
What about my I am humorous?
I found this humorous.
Oh, that got a laugh from the History Center.
I did hear that.
To be my
I want to answer that question in multiple parts. One is, I absolutely love this. None of this passion is fake. I can't believe that this is my job. 2 is these students have been fantastic, and I think they got the archaeology bug too. And 3 is, rumor has it they do a really mean Seth Mallios impersonation. I don't know if anyone's brave enough because the grades haven't been turned in yet. But I bet there's some great impersonations. But I think Mike's shirt is the best archaeological joke. But that's a fantastic question.
One final question from us, and then we'll let you go to have lunch. Seth, what are you hoping that people who come to the History Center, see the exhibit, what do you hope that they walk away with?
I think there are a couple of key points. I think the number one issue is the story of perseverance and what Harrison overcame. You know, that opening area of the exhibit where you get to see decade by decade what Harrison and other ethnic minorities were facing, and how it's different from a lot of the history we were taught in schools. I think that's the number one thing. The number 2 thing's a little more nuanced, and it's about how there are a lot of myths and fables out there, and that the archaeology really helps to bust some of those myths, reorient some of those histories, that we take a lot of pride in the fact that we're the first person to hold these artifacts in 100, 150 years. And there's that direct connection that feels a little more authentic, as opposed to a story written by somebody that maybe didn't even know Harrison. And so we feel that kind of direct connection. And I think the last thing is just about how amazing it is to have a history center that's also a community center. that we have such diverse histories being told and showcased at the History Center, that this truly is everyone's history. That's not always the case at museums. That's not always the case at historical societies. And I love the trajectory of the History Center in this being San Diego's community center as well as the History Center.
Thank you very much for that, Seth. This has been an amazing day, and Seth, thank you to you for your continued leadership, for our partnership with San Diego State. Please thank Jim for me as well. And Beverly says you're good looking.
Thanks, Beverly.
And
thank you, Bill. This has been a wonderful event. It's something that I don't think I'm going to forget anytime soon.
yes, and I also want to thank Mike Watson for facilitating the video for us, and we'll let you guys go and have lunch. So thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Bill.